Okay, to those who may have watched last week, I was using these double aperture stencils, the rectangle ones in last week's live. And I think last week I talked myself into using these stencils again, just to give you a bit more of a tutorial on how to use them. So it's possible that lots of you have them, but they're perhaps sitting at the bottom of your LISA stash at the moment, because there's been so many fabulous things launched since these came out. So understandably, as new things come in, they get put on top of the pile, and obviously you go to the new things. But to have these staples in your stash is really, really useful. And because they are such useful shapes, background shapes, they will definitely work with all of these brand new things that LISA has brought out and will continue to bring out, particularly over these last couple of shows. And of course, with the introduction of these new fabulous metallic inks, which I'm waiting for mine still to come through, I'm so excited for them, then obviously this is all ink work with stencils. So practice with them now, get your brand new inks in, and then you can launch straight into using them. Some of you will start getting them in the next couple of days as well, so that's it's a really good time to start practicing these. So if you remember, on last week's live, I actually created this card, and the focus was just to make A6 cards last week, and I used the Posy of Roses stencil, which you can see in the background here. But what I'd done, I actually created this frame, the faux frame in the background I stamped into, and it was that gave me the idea that I should perhaps continue on and use these stencils. Now, all the stencils are in stock. I did have a quick check last night, so unless things have changed. There are 3 shapes in this set. You have the square, the circle, and the rectangle. They're called the double aperture range from the Art Stencils, and basically what that means is that each set of shapes comes with I'll say 2 sheets of stencils, because I'll just show you with this first set here. Let's just move these along out the way. Each set comes with 2 sheets of stencils, and on each sheet you get the apertures within them. So regardless of the shape you get, this is the format that you'll have. And you see that it all works on the peg system, because I think these were actually brought out before the Ultimate was launched as well. So everyone was wondering what these pegs were for, so now we know. But you can see here that with the apertures, I've actually taped these together just so as I lose them. But these are all actually loose. So I'll just take them together just to make sure I don't lose them actually. But these do all come loose. So it means that you can create frames and different rectangle shapes of different widths as you go along. So I'm just going to take that one off there. That just enables me just to, there we are, just to remove these a little bit. So how I keep these together is basically like this, and you can see that these are all loose, and you can peel these off of the washi tape. I've just put mine in a plastic envelope also, so that might be a good way for you to store them. But the idea of them being a double aperture, let me just take these out. One set of shapes is slightly smaller than the other, or slightly larger, whichever way you want to look at it. And if I show you that by putting the 2 main stencils together, let me do it this way around. I've put the larger stencil at the bottom there, and I've layered the top stencil, or the slightly smaller one, over the top. And you can see there's about ½ centimetre, about 5mm difference, which gives us that frame. Now, if you were to take the the corresponding frame from each set, this is the effect that you will get all the way along. And what that allows us to do is to create layered effects on all of our stenciling. So I'll perhaps show you on the square one here. You can see here that I've actually created the different layers, and that gives us the faux matting and layering. So that's what I want to show you today, different combinations on how to actually use these. And what this actually enables us to do, gives us a flat background, so it gives us that matte and layering look without the bulk of having the cardstock layers, which if you wanted the layering in the background to then add your die cut elements on top, your leaves and your flowers, what you're doing is you're reducing the bulk of your design basically. You don't want to have too many bulky layers at this stage. If you're going to then be adding 2 or 3 layers of flowers, or decoupage flowers or leaves on top of this. And this just gives us a really nice soft look in the background. So hopefully I can show you 3 different ways to use this using each of the shapes. So you can see here I've got 3 different backgrounds which I want to try and recreate for you. This one here, we have a very pale layered frame, and I've added another stencil inside. Now I've chosen this geometric design, but you can use any of your stencils, even any of your layering stencils on the inside. This square one, I've used lots of different layers to create different tones, and I'll show you sort of how this natural halo really sort of happens in the middle, which gives us a lovely airbrushed look. And then we can go on to think about creating wreaths or sort of like rings here, and even onto craft cards. So don't forget that you can stencil onto something other than a white card. And obviously now with these metallic inks coming through, it's given us the option to stencil and ink onto black card or the darker cards too. I'm using the rectangles, and I'm using the 2 largest stencils this time. So I'm going to take away the apertures there. We'll just leave them to one side. Okay. So I'm going to start with the smaller one first. There's a couple of different ways of doing this. As I say, depending on the look that you want and just how you find working with them yourself, you'll figure out a way you want to do it. But I'm starting with the smaller of the rectangles on this main sheet first, and I'm using the peg system there. I use my yellow blending ink. I've positioned the frame for the smallest set of rectangles. Now I'm going to take that frame away, because what I want to do, I don't want to stencil on the inside. I want to create a frame and start stenciling outwards. So this is one way of actually creating the frame. So if I take my blending ink and my brush, and you can tape this down or you can use your magnets. I would perhaps suggest using your magnets for this, because you don't want to have the line of any tape sort of getting in the way. But if you are using tape, just work your way around. When you get to the area where your tape is, just move it and we can work around it that way. What I want to do is to take some ink, blend it briefly onto the stencils and just push outwards. So basically what we're doing, we're going to create a halo around this rectangle stencil. Just work off the stencil onto the white card and you'll see the halo starting to happen. How far out you want to blend onto the cardstock is entirely up to you, but you don't need to go too far out, I would say. Just so as you've got some of that coloured ink onto the cardstock. And I always start on the plastic material, onto the stencil material and onto the cardstock, because then that stops the initial concentration of ink that is a little harder to blend out. But what we want to do, I'm just holding that in place and just moving the magnets around so they don't get in the way. We just blend out around What this is basically doing is just creating a window, a rectangle window for us, which we can then work on the inside. It can be either be used to mount your die cuts, or you can stamp within it. So we just work our way around. And make sure we've got a good amount of ink there, so we can take our magnets away. And when we lift that, we have our window on the inside. Now, because of the nature of the way these are die cut, you will end up with a little bit of ink that go through, which you can see here, but don't worry about that. That can usually get disguised in with what you're layering on the inside. And you know what, I haven't actually found that to be a hindrance or to actually get in the way at all. Now I'm coming in with the other set of apertures, which are slightly larger, and I've just laid that over the top, and because of the nature of the material, you can actually see where the in the other frame is, so you'd be able to line that up nicely. So I'm going to come in and ink that. Now I'm going to go a little heavier because I really do want that distinction between the two layers that we've inked. So I'm going to come all the way around. I've done a rectangle onto a square card here, but equally you could be using your 5x7 cards or your A6 cards, and obviously the rectangle will fit really nicely onto those. So you can now see that we have a double frame, and if we put this one on here, then that gives us the internal. So it's this frame that I'm going to use next, because what I want to actually do is to stencil on the inside of that aperture. Now, because we've masked the majority of the yellow square around the outside, it means I can come in and stencil in the centre of this now with a different colour. Again, working on the edge and then coming into the centre of the stencil there. This creates just a really lovely background for perhaps something like oh, I don't know, I've used the balloons, but it's really great for a guy's card. And obviously, depending on the stencil that you're using in there, it'll be great for teenagers, something, or somebody that you aren't using a particular theme for, if you want to just use your sentiment as the main focal point. I'll move that away. You can see that you've got a nice window there with the frame around the outside. Now that's a really nice, bright, vibrant with the yellow and the blue. It's a really nice flat background, and imagine that we've got heart stencils that we can use in there. We've got leaves, we've got vines, and you can see actually that that's an awful lot more. It's a lot bolder than the original one that I've done, but my thinking behind it was that you can use that for your balloons, and we can mount that onto a card. I quite like the white mount straight onto card blank there, and I would possibly even put like 3D foam just to raise that a little bit, but we can use that for the balloons, and that really doesn't need much more on there except for a sentiment, which we can just use one of our stickers, or you can die cut or stamp any of the multitude of sentiments that we've got from Lisa. But if you're looking just for a super quick card, I think that is great and really, really effective. So that's one way to use your stencils. I'll go through and I'll use the square stencils for you. Let me just take those off. As I say, I find it a lot easier just to keep these attached by a bit of washi tape, and as soon as this becomes sort of non-tacky, then it's so easy just to get another piece of tape and add that on. So this time round I'm going to work into the shape as opposed to creating a border on the outside of the shape. So I'm going to work with the largest one first. I'm going to come in and just stencil through the square but into the centre this time. So you can see straight away that we're creating a different look. This time I'm actually creating a square block as opposed to the outside frame where I left the aperture white. So straight away that gives us a different look, doesn't it? So I'm not going to go, I've already gone a bit too dark, but I'm not going to go as dark because I'm going to be building the ink on top of this as I work into the aperture here. So we've got a nice even frame. So I replace this stencil with the size down, and again work in, and you can see how we're going to use the layering of the inks to create the shading. I'm going to add just a little bit of grey, just a tiny amount, and you'll know this from blending with your flowers, that when you add a secondary colour like this, just for a bit of shading, you're not adding it to add colour, you're adding it just for that contrast, which isn't necessarily visible, but makes all the difference, if you know what I mean. It's a bit like shading when you do your makeup, I think. Not that I wear too much, to be honest. I never was any good at that. I'm much better at it blending and shading on paper. So I shall stick to that, I think. Okay, so when I move that away now, we have the beginnings of the frame there, and you can see how this halo is beginning to happen. It's because I'm not working the ink right into the centre. Now, a lot of people would, and as I go in and go down with these smaller squares, then this will obviously get filled in a lot more. So what I'm going to be doing, I shall leave my frame there, because I bring in one of these apertures. Actually, let's take it off that way. This is the one I want to use, and I'm going to put that into the aperture there, and that immediately closes down that frame, doesn't it? So then I can just continue with more ink, and this is going to give us another layer, another layer of matte and layering, basically. Now it's possible actually that as you go down these smaller apertures, to use smaller brushes, because if you've noticed with when you're working with these brushes, the smaller you go, the more ink that they put onto the cardstock for you. So if you do want a more concentrated amount of ink, it might be worth just going down a brush size a little bit, and you may find that that works for you. So now I want to create another layer within this. That layer doesn't work, so I'm going to just go down the sizes a little bit more, and you can see there that I've picked up a square which doesn't fit into the frame that I'm using, so that tells me that it would fit into the other frame. So I swap around. Now obviously that's loose in there, which means if you wanted to, you could always set it off at an angle. There's no reason why actually you need to be creating like the concentrics, concentric squares. If you set that off at an angle, and you can create a whole different look again. But for the purposes of this, and just show you how these layers work, we just build it in that, oh, I've taken the wrong one again. We just build in the aperture there, which will mean then I can put this frame back in. And then I can continue working with my ink and create another layer with a bit of grey, just to add that shading into the corners again, because I think that gives us a really nice contrast between those matte layers. It gives us that illusion of shadow, and that possibly that there is some dimension there when there actually isn't. You don't need to go mad with this, with the darker shades. And wouldn't it be lovely if you could perhaps add highlights like this with the metallic inks that are coming through? I mean, I really can't wait to play with those. The effects that we're going to get just by switching to the metallic inks with our techniques is going to be fabulous, I think. So let me take away all of those layers. We can see now that we've got a whole set of matte and layering going on. Excuse the little extra bit there, but you can see we've gone from a really subtle to a lot darker, and I think actually this would work out very different each time you do it. Actually that shows bolder on the screen there, looking at it now, doesn't it? But yeah, it really does depend on what effect you want to have. Now we can mount this onto a card blank. So we have our brand new sparkly card, which is the first time I've used that. I mean, how blingy is that? And you really don't need much more to make this card other than like a stencil die cut and a sentiment. And the stencils that I've used here are the foliage elements. It's the 3D, the Slimline collection. So we have the stencils, the layering stencils of the foliage elements, and then we have the embossing folder and the dies that go with that as well. All of these are in stock, and all I've done with the leaves, actually, you can see that I've used this design here, which is here on the stencil, and I've just stenciled it in pink and with a little bit of grey. And I've actually used purple for the stems, so I've gone sort of bit out there with that, and I've die cut it. I've die cut a second one of these and just offset it, so I have the grey shadow on there. So that really gives us that dimension when we pop that on there. The third one I wanted to do was the circle. And I want to do this onto craft card for you. And what I've actually done also is done a tiny bit of stenciling on the inside. You can see now why I tape them all together. It makes it a lot easier just to sort of get your mind clear when you get them out of the packet, so you know what you're doing. It's a bit different when you're working with them. Obviously everything all goes to pot and goes everywhere, but when you first thinking of your idea of the card, it's nice to have a little bit of order just to know where you're going with things. As I say, each of these sets is in exactly the same format. You get 2 sets of stencils in effect there. So again, I'm working on 2 square card again. Again, this is my favourite, but this time I want to create a frame, whereas here I created the frame and I left it white by stenciling on either side. On this card I actually want to create a coloured frame. So to do this, I'm actually going to leave out one of the layers of the stencils and mask the centre. And again, for this, you'll need your magnets again, just to hold that in place. Or if you want just a little bit of tape, perhaps I'll show you the way that we do that. We just put one bit of tape there, moved around. Although the magnets are holding that in the centre there, I do like to just keep a finger on that, just to keep control of that centre area. So now I've got down to the area where I've put that bit of masking tape. So all I want to do is just, if you can keep that loose enough, you just peel that away, just move that somewhere else so you don't actually ink over the masking tape and have that in the way. So we have that frame inked now. Now, before I take all of that away, what I want to do is actually stamp through that ring aperture that I've created there. So I'm going to use my texture stamp collection, which I haven't used in a long time actually. So I'm going to take out the text version. Any of the stamps would work actually, but I do like the text. I'm not actually going to mount this on a block because I want to use it like this. The back stays tacky enough for it to stay on my fingers there, but I want to use the flexibility of the stamp to actually get into and down past the depth of the mylar there, which particularly as we're stamping it into a small space, you just need to bear in mind. So all I'm doing, just inking up with the same green, so it'll be tone on tone, which I think is a fab effect. I'm just inking up and just going around, just stamping into that aperture there. Because it's tone on tone, as the ink dries, this will really sort of fade into the background, but it'll still be there to add texture. It's not like an obvious stamping. You don't want to see the details particularly, so don't worry too much if there are sort of areas missing in effect, but it just adds a tiny bit of detail. So we've done that there. Now what we can do, you see we have this area in the centre here, but I've left an area of craft card. So we take the magnets away. We could leave it like that, and if I just remove that gently, we have that area there, which might just be enough for you. Now this is where you have your choice, and you can actually have a little play and see what size you want the area in the centre to be. So what I've on this card that I've used, the combination was using the other frame. So I take this one away, place this one on, and you can see how brilliant now the this peg system is, because not once have I had to worry about my piece of work moving underneath. Because of this silicone mat, it keeps it all in place, and I can swap and change my stencils and to give me all this effect, which is, say, without this, the peg system and the Ultimate, it would make this technique a lot trickier than it actually sort of needs to be, really. So now what I want to do is create my aperture so I can stencil into this circle. Now you notice this time I'm not really creating any, oh, there's too much ink there. I'm not really creating any shadow effects by sort of the double layering. And just because these stencils do enable you to do that, doesn't mean that you always need to. You can just use combinations of the stencils, and why not even mix and match the shapes, you know. I'm sure some of these circle stencils will fit perfectly within some of the square shapes. I haven't actually played with that myself actually, but you know, if you've got the time and the patience to play, give it all a go and just see what fits with each other, and just create some really interesting layers on your background. You're basically creating yourself your own background paper. Now before I take away these stencils here, I do want to stamp onto or through this stencil again, just to create a bit of balance. So I just stamp that twice, the text detail there, and I can take that away. And again, we have the beginnings of a wreath. Imagine doing this for Christmas with Christmas colours. I think that would look lovely. Now to create this into a card, I've die cut myself a white frame. So imagine this going onto a white card blank, like so. I've used the nested, scalloped and plain circle dies to create myself a frame which fits perfectly around the outside of that stencil there. I've used the oval ornaments, and I've used just the words that go into the centre. I don't need to use all the rest of it. but I've just used those centre areas just to put onto the centre there, and you can see why I wanted that background in the centre. So that fits really nicely, and you can see how perfectly well and how coordinated all the circles work together. So I've gone from stencils to dies, and the shapes work. And the next stencils I've used are the flower blooms, the layering stencils and the dies, and I've created like these daisy type flowers here that I can use just to mount and create a posy. Now I can either go all the way around. I can add as few or as little as I want, so that's I shall stick these down a bit later on, but I think that gives us a really nice background to mount those onto as well. But again, you can use any of your corner designs. If you were to do exactly the same technique but with a square, it would look totally different, and you can use like your corner pansy thing set that you have, or any of the other corners that you have. I forget now all the ones that Lisa's brought out now. So there's 3 different looks for you using the 3 different shapes. So hopefully you can see the benefit of using these layering stencils. These stencils, when you first look at them, they can be a little bit daunting, and they say designs don't necessarily immediately jump out at you with them, but use them in the background. They are fantastic accents. There's no reason why you can't create these frames and emboss them, or if you've got a die cut that fits in there that you can emboss, then that'd be another way of doing it too. There's so many different options. Hopefully it's just sort of whetted your appetite just to give that a go, particularly if you enjoy playing with your inks, because yeah, you can get really messy with that. It's a great afternoon entertainment, I think. But thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed. Take care, everyone.